They observed ash coating the ocean surface up to 100 miles offshore. Giant ash plumes that were coming up, all of that smoke coming up from this horrendous, devastating fire. We were not prepared for a climate disaster like this.
Tracy Quinn, who's the president and CEO of Heal the Bay.
Anybody seeing a sick animal, anyone watching a dolphin die on the coast is touched and hopefully can understand that it's climate change that is causing this.
You're listening to A Climate Change. This is Matt Matern, your host, and I've got a great guest on the program, Tracy Quinn, who's the president and CEO of Heal the Bay. This is the second time we've had a chance to chat with Tracy, and I'm looking forward to kind of getting an update on what's been happening since the last time we've talked. Great to have you on the program, Tracy.
Thanks for having me back.
Well, the big thing that's happened since we last talked is the fires here in Los Angeles, and I guess you were personally affected by this. So, do tell what your personal experience was, as well as the devastation to the bay with all the debris and chemicals being washed out to the bay, things from thousands of houses and chemicals and cars and God knows what.
Yeah, so I bought my very first condo in the Pacific Palisades in 2023, and I was really enjoying living there. And I was actually in Antarctica on an expedition boat when the fires broke out. So I didn't experience a lot of the things that my neighbors and community did with the evacuation. And my home, and I'm very grateful my home is still standing. It didn't burn in the fire, didn't sustain structural damage, but it did sustain ash and smoke damage. So I'm still displaced and will be for a few more months while we work through remediation. But I know how lucky I am because so many of my neighbors lost everything. And in that fire, there was, I think, even those of us observing online, as I did from Antarctica, saw the giant ash plumes that were coming up, all of that smoke coming up from this horrendous, devastating fire. And in fact, there were scientists offshore during the fires, just happenstance, and they observed ash coating the ocean surface up to 100 miles offshore. So we knew that there were going to be potentially devastating impacts to marine life and the ocean ecosystem as well. And Heal the Bay, with our 40 years of work on water quality and understanding the coastal environment, jumped into action to be one of the first science voices on the front lines, taking samples to understand what those impacts were going to be.
Well, I understand that a lot of the chemicals that got put into the water from the fires were things that generally were never tested for by various organizations because they're not the normal things that you would find in the water. So maybe I'm not sure if I'm correct on that front, but why don't you take that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that this mega fire highlighted was that we were not prepared for a climate disaster like this. Even though Southern California has had fires, and we just had the Franklin fire in December, and obviously the Woolsey fire was incredibly destructive. We were not prepared for something of this scale, and we hadn't been testing. You don't test for heavy metals or what you expect from a burned lithium ion battery out into the ocean regularly. We had baselines for some things, and there are some contaminants that had been tested for infrequently, but certainly not. We didn't have baselines for all of the heavy metals, for PCBs, for polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, the things that we would expect to see when you have so many urban structures burn. And that made it really difficult to understand when we went out to do the sampling. Is what we're seeing attributed to the fire, or is this potentially, was this already here? So there were a number of things that made it really challenging. There's also no protocols on what exactly to test for. It's not like after a disaster, Department of Public Health goes out and tests for X, Y, and Z. That doesn't exist. And I think that's something that we're working on to change.
In terms of the dissipation of these heavy metals and crazy cocktail of chemicals, what are you finding? Are there still tremendous amounts of these or not?
Well, we've only have a handful of samples. So Heal the Bay went out and we sampled in January when the only thing that we expected to see in the ocean was contamination from the ash deposition. We then went back out after that first rain, what we call the first flush. And that was the first rain that Southern California had in almost a year. So that was carrying contaminants from all over the watershed, from summit to sea, anything that you leave on the street, like, forgetful pet owner is leaving some pet waste behind to cars leaking oil, all of that rushes in. So that also made it challenging to define exactly what was coming from the burn area and what was coming from the rest of the watershed. And then the Department of Public Health and the LA Regional Water Quality Control Board did sampling in January, February, March, and then at the beginning of May. And for the ocean water, they've also done some testing for the sand as well that we've been looking at. But when you look at the water, we only have this handful of data, and so we can kind of try to look for some what's happening over time, and what's happening spatially because sampling is happening north of the burn area, throughout the burn area, and then south as far as Palos Verdes. So we can kind of look at the spatial distribution, and generally the results are pretty consistent. And where we do see some contaminants that maybe aren't consistent throughout the testing, it's hard to understand why. So this is gonna take months, if not years, to really look through this data to better understand why are we seeing elevated concentrations at certain locations and at different times than you might expect. What we want to see happen is more testing so that we can have a fuller set of data to really understand how are these contaminants moving, where is the dilution happening? Is there areas where contaminants are potentially pooling that might cause risk to public health or risk to marine health? I think what we have found early on is that, the other part to not having the protocols in place of what to test for is that we also don't have established public health standards for recreational contact with a lot of these contaminants. So we've had to scramble to figure out how do we know when we're looking at these contaminants if it's going to be safe for people to swim and surf. We looked at, the things that were available were like the ocean plan, but the human health standards in that are for fish consumption. We looked at drinking water standards, but that's not, that's not appropriate because we're not drinking the ocean water, and ingestion is a very different pathway for exposure than surfing or swimming. And so, we had to go to this EPA risk screening tool where we could put in these different parameters, like you're an infant and you're in the water for 4 hours a day for 180 days. What concentration would pose a risk? And, is trying to establish patterns in that way. And looking at it through that lens, we are not seeing concentrations that appear to pose a risk to public health from recreational contact for getting in the water. And that's great news. But we are seeing concentrations that pose a risk to marine life. So, I think on the one hand, we can't definitively say that it's safe to swim because we don't know that we're testing for everything, and we don't have these public health standards, but we can say that the risk appears to be low.
Well, I guess it kind of boggles my mind that we're not getting more testing when you figure that there are 10 million people who are affected by this or more who live in LA County. It seems like we could all put in a buck to get the testing done or whatever. Why is the testing not being done?
Well, I think one is costs. These tests are not cheap. So every individual sample is about $3,000. So when you look at 10 to 12 sampling sites along the coast of the bay. You're looking at, $30 to $36,000 for each sampling event. So for an organization like Heal the Bay to take this on, it's really challenging. And then I think for the public health departments and the regional board, the first several tests showed that the contamination concentrations were below risk screening levels. So I think that that might have factored into their decision to test less frequently. I think this is important, right? We've had other fires. We had Lahaina had a fire that affected the coast. These things are going to continue to happen, and what we collect now is going to be the base data set because we haven't collected a lot of data in these previous events. And this can help to not only help us figure out how we're going to respond and how we're going to protect the coast and public health, but how future communities that experience a climate disaster like this are going to be prepared. We need to make sure that we learn from this incident and that we have protocols and guidelines in place for the next community that joins this really unfortunate club.
Well, I'm no scientist, but I have a little bit of a concern that if marine life is being affected, then why wouldn't humans be adversely affected?
Well, I mean, I think it's because they live in the water, right? That's their food source. And the way that heavy metals work is that they're bioaccumulated. So they get into the food chain. And then, so maybe they settle into the sediment, and you'll have sort of crustaceans and other things that are lower on the food chain will start to consume those heavy metals. And then larger fish will eat them. And then seals and dolphins will eat those fish. And that will start to bioaccumulate in their bodies. Humans are just going in to swim. We're not drinking the water. We're not eating, our entire diets aren't made up of the fish that are consuming the heavy metals. And so we're less at risk because we're not exposed to as much. And we can withstand higher concentrations because of that limited exposure.
Well, talk to us a little bit about the marine health, and I've read about number of different sea mammals that seem to be getting sick and dying along the coast, and the temporal connection seems pretty close. Like there's a big fire, and then all of a sudden, a huge amount of sea lions are washing up on the shores.
I'm so glad you brought this up because this has caused a lot of confusion. These harmful algal blooms that we've been experiencing off the coast are devastating. They are a natural occurrence. They happen all of the time. Sometimes they're healthy algal blooms and they just provide a lot of great food for our sea life, and sometimes they're toxic. And so, what we saw this year is the same thing we've seen for the last 4 years: is that we had a harmful algal bloom that produced domoic acid. Domoic acid is a neurotoxin. It impacts our sea life. And just as I talked about working its way through the food chain, this domoic acid also works its way through the food chain. And when it gets to the larger sea life, like our sea lions, it causes a condition that's very similar to if they had taken like acid. They start to become disoriented. It affects their brain, and they become very confused. Then they come on shore. We have seen this for the last 4 years. This harmful algal bloom actually started in December, so it predated the fires. But it lasted longer than any previous event, and it was much more intense than the previous events. And so it does appear that it was impacted by the fires. And the current theory is that there were conditions that made the fires worse. So these harmful algal blooms often come from upwelling of nutrients. They're caused by nitrogen and phosphorus in the marine environment that are already there and are also added from our wastewater treatment plants and some other sources. And these harmful algal blooms happen when there's an upwelling of those nutrients from the ocean floor that bring it up. It hits the sunlight and it causes this big algal bloom. Now, this upwelling can happen when we have really high winds. And as you might recall, at the beginning of the fires, LA was experiencing winds up to 100 miles an hour. So that could have contributed to the upwelling. And then when we are trying to put out the fires, we're using phosphorus-based fire retardants. So when that washed into the ocean after that series of rain events in late January and February, that could have also helped to feed that algal bloom, making it more intense and making it last longer. So I think it's what's really important for folks to understand is that it's very unlikely that it was the heavy metals or things, from the ash and the burned areas that made those animals sick. What is most likely, and what we believe the data will confirm, is that this is attributed entirely to the algal bloom and to the domoic acid. And then we also had another harmful bloom of saxitoxin at the same time. We never get those two things. That may be what was affecting the dolphins and the whales. But we believe that the nutrients from the fires could have contributed to that to make that so much worse.
Well, it's hard for me to resist asking further question about the sea lions taking acid. Are we talking about LSD? So they were tripping?
Yes, yes, it's very what we understand from the scientists, it's very s it's they're tripping, yes. And the good thing to know is that if they get to shore and they get treatment from folks like the Marine Mammal Care Center, they can be treated and, be and recover and go back to living a healthy life. So I think that, that's really important that there are great groups out there like Heal the Bay that are doing the testing and doing, making sure we have the science. And we have great groups like the Marine Mammal Care Center that are taking care of these animals when they are harmed by these types of incidents.
So it's kind of like sea lion rehab.
Exactly, exactly.
So I've never heard of saxitoxins. What are they and where are they coming from?
They are also naturally occurring. So all of these harmful algal blooms are naturally occurring. Saxitoxin is very similar to domoic acid, but it's how it affects the animals is different. It's a paralytic, so it's going to affect their ability to swim. And this is what we think is was causing the dolphins to beach themselves, is that they were getting poisoning from the saxitoxin. It was making it challenging for them to swim, and they beached themselves. This may also be what, impacted the whales. We weren't, testing for saxitoxin, or the Marine Mammal Care Center and other scientific entities weren't testing for saxitoxin at the time. We did see domoic acid in a lot of these animals, but, it does seem as though the saxitoxin being a paralytic could have impacted, animals like the dolphins and the whales.
Well, it is a complex set of chemical reactions going out there.
Yeah, I mean, just a moment on that. I think what may be particularly interesting to your audience is that, this is happening more and more because of climate change. Climate change is creating the perfect conditions for these harmful algal blooms. It's certainly not being helped by the fact that we're dumping a ton of nutrients into the ocean every year, predominantly through our wastewater treatment plants. But climate change is a huge contributing factor. And so, as climate change gets worse, we're going to continue to see these events, and they are likely to be longer and more intense. And so I think for those of us that live near the coast, for those of us that love the coast, knowing that this is one of the devastating impacts of climate change, I think this makes it real for a real broad spectrum of folks, beyond party lines, beyond partisanship. I think anybody seeing a sick animal, anyone watching a dolphin die on the coast is touched, and hopefully can understand that it's climate change that is causing this.
Well, tell us why climate change is causing this. Obviously, the fires were exacerbated by climate change and the weather patterns and the droughts and the heat and all of that. But tell us the other things that are contributing to these events.
Warmer temperatures, or impacts on the ocean temperature, changes to swell and wind. All of these things can help to exacerbate upwelling, and climate change is impacting all of those things, right? It's making our oceans warmer. It's increasing winds. It's changing climate and weather patterns. And so, those things are going to have consequences, that we probably couldn't have predicted. It certainly wasn't in our top 10. I think we were looking at, more intense hurricanes and tornadoes and other natural disasters. But understanding that even these slight changes in weather patterns can really impact marine life and, life on Earth.
What has been done to mitigate the runoff of the chemicals, in particular from the fires in those areas, which, my understanding, there's still a tremendous amount of chemicals kind of exposed. I know I believe the Army Corps of Engineers helped clean up a lot of people's homes or, the lots where they had been destroyed. What's the status on that?
So the Army Corps is almost completed with their work. So the way that it worked after the fires is the EPA comes in and they remove all of the hazardous materials. So propane tanks, household chemicals, other things that lithium ion batteries that burned and all the Teslas that were lost in the fires. They come in and they remove those, and they have a separate processing for those. Then the Army Corps comes in, and if a homeowner elects to sign a right of entry form and elects to have the Army Corps come in, they will come in and do debris removal. and they remove everything down to the foundation of the burned area, and some of the soil. And they're moving at quicker than they've ever moved before. I think those of us that live there are concerned that they're moving too quickly potentially, and certainly concerned that we aren't getting the soil testing that previous communities impacted by wildfire had gotten to ensure that there aren't legacy contaminants left behind. There's a lot less burn debris left behind to be entering our coastal waters and through the storm drain system. In the immediate aftermath of the fire, leading up to that first storm, LA County Public Works and LA Sanitation in the Palisades deployed a lot of mitigation measures to try to keep those pollutants out of our storm drain system. Unfortunately, the fire areas between the Palisades fire and the Eaton fires were, that they covered huge areas of land. When you see the maps for those two burn areas, you're talking about, Malibu to near the Santa Monica border, from PCH to the 101, almost to the 405. This is an incredible amount of area just in the Palisades fire. Similarly, in the Eaton fire, just covered a lot of ground. And so it was really challenging for them to quickly deploy enough mitigation measures like filtration socks and other things to keep those pollutants out of our stormwater. I think this is just another reason why we need to invest in stormwater capture all across the greater Los Angeles area. Stormwater capture systems help to keep these pollutants out of storm drain systems and out of our surface waters, our rivers, and our ocean. They also help us to adapt to climate change. If you do stormwater capture in the form of a park in a highly urbanized neighborhood, you're going to be able to capture the water that might be flooding the neighborhood when it rains. You're going to be able to provide green space in an area that's probably experiencing extreme heat, cooling that neighborhood. Um, you might even be able to, address impacts of drought by capturing that stormwater for reuse and being able to use that as irrigation when we're not getting a lot of precipitation or when there's shortages from our imported water supplies. So, stormwater capture is a really important tool in a portfolio of tools to make sure that our communities are better adapting to climate change, and certainly can help to protect us when it comes to climate disasters like wildfires.
Well, is Heal the Bay involved at all in fire prevention projects? I realize it's a little bit a field from your standard operating things, but it seems as though obviously the huge fire affected the ocean so badly that I wonder how you're assessing that risk and what your input is there.
Yeah, we've jumped into a lot of new areas since the fires in January. And we are looking at, what are the in developing guidelines and recommendations for what to do after a fire to protect coastal waters. That is going to be a multi year project, looking into what happened here and really making sure that we're gathering the data. But I've been appointed by Supervisor Lindsay Horvath here in LA County to a Blue Ribbon Commission on climate action and fire safe recovery. And through that commission, I've been joined by experts on a myriad of areas such as disaster recovery and people who've looked at disasters all over the world. And we have put together a set of recommendations, not only to make sure that our communities, when they're rebuilt, are more fire resilient, but also looking at ways to be more climate resilient. And so a lot of those solutions are the same. We can look at things like in these last fires, one of the challenges was a loss of pressure in the system. And that was because when homes burned, the water still flowed through those pipes, and that was pulling from the same system as the firefighters. In some cases, homeowners stayed behind to use their hose to hose down their properties or left their hoses running when they evacuated. Again, that's pulling from the same system. But if we integrate these same strategies for stormwater capture and nature based solutions into our communities, both the ones that we're rebuilding and the ones that are also at risk from these types of events, we can use those as fire breaks. So we can build in parks that serve as buffer zones and fire breaks. Those can have large cisterns underneath that can provide redundancy in our water system. Homes can have cisterns on their parcels that can provide a supply for homeowners if they want to have that tied to a sprinkler system on their roof, or they want to use that to do, put some prevention hose down their properties before they leave. That isn't going to pull from the same system as the firefighters. So it's really, I think we're going to see some really innovative and interesting recommendations coming out of this Blue Ribbon Commission. The report comes out on June 20th. And so that will be public. We've had an interim report that already came out where folks can see some of these recommendations. But it's really interesting to see when we're thinking about climate resilience, we're thinking about protecting our coastal waters, how a lot of those strategies can have benefits when you're looking at things like climate disasters and these mega fires that we're starting to experience more and more.
Well, how does that have any crossover to Measure W and the 300 million for stormwater capture projects that is being funded by Measure W? Is this a separate set of potential solutions?
No, I think, we're looking at, can Measure W funds be used for these types of projects? Right now, there is a ranking system that's used to prioritize different project proposals that come into the Safe Clean Water program, which is the program that administers those Measure W funds. And really looking at, do we want to, in the near term, as we're rebuilding these communities, redirect some of that funding to make sure that we're embedding these principles of Measure W, principles of the Safe Clean Water program into these communities that can be examples for what else we can do throughout the watershed. I think that's still yet to be determined. There are a lot of projects who are already in the queue for the Safe Clean Water program. But I definitely see that as a funding source for the types of stormwater capture projects we would like to see in these recovery areas.
Is there going to be spending beyond that 300 million a year to create greater resiliency and safety for the community?
Yeah, I think I'm hopeful that we're able. We don't have an established fund right now. I know that the LA County Board of Supervisors is looking at some type of fund that could go to these types of projects and other things within the recovery area. And the details of that are still being worked out. I think this is a challenging time. Our local budgets, our state budget are really challenging right now. We're in deficits in both LA City's budget and our state budget. That's certainly a challenge when we're thinking about a multi-billion-dollar recovery. And we're not seeing the type of aid come from the federal government that we've seen in previous disasters. And so that also is a challenge. A lot of the programs that have been available to previous communities are likely not going to be available to the California communities that suffered in these fires.
Well, tell us about some of the projects that you see on the horizon as being the most important projects, as well as what percentage of stormwater is being captured now, and what percentage or maybe volume that we need to capture, and the goal for 2045. If we captured all of it or a lot of it, would that be enough to deal with all of our water needs in LA County? Or are we still gonna have needs beyond capturing the stormwater?
Yeah, I don't think there's a silver bullet for our water supply issues, particularly in an area like Southern California, where we have a very dense population and where historically the majority of our water has come from other places hundreds of miles away. But there is incredible opportunity for us to do stormwater capture. I'm really excited about the small projects that are being proposed, the ones that provide native plants and really help to beautify neighborhoods. And I'm excited about the large, big diversion projects that are being looked at right now, where we're going to have, huge impacts in being able to recharge our groundwater aquifers, especially as some of our ones in Los Angeles in the Valley have been remediated or have remediation projects where we're going to be able to use those groundwater sources again. So I think what's really cool about Measure W is that you can do both types of projects. It's a funding source for both types of projects, projects of all scales, projects of multiple benefits. But we're going to need more than just stormwater. There are still huge opportunities for water efficiency. I think looking at how much turf we still have in Southern California, opportunities to transform our landscapes to, instead of being sort of boring lawns, to be urban sponges that are holding on to water and acting as sort of these mini stormwater capture projects at the parcel level. And there are a lot of funding that's available through the Metropolitan Water District and local water suppliers to help homeowners or commercial business owners to do those types of projects. And we're still going to need to recycle our wastewater. I think when you look across the globe at other places that have similar climates to Southern California, they're recycling a heck of a lot more wastewater than we are. And we have two projects here in Southern California that are moving forward, one more quickly than the other. Metropolitan Water District, in partnership with LA County Sanitation District, is working on the Pure Water SoCal project in Carson. That's going to recycle the wastewater that's currently dumped to the ocean. And in Los Angeles, the city of LA is looking at doing recycling at both their Tillman plant, that's moving forward, that's in the valley, as well as at the Hyperion treatment plant in El Segundo. Those will provide, I mean, at El Segundo alone, they are discharging about 260 million gallons a day of wastewater into the ocean. So even just half of that getting back into our drinking water system would provide an incredibly resilient supply of water for Southern California. So those local supplies can really work together to make us more resilient and to make sure that we're creating local jobs, local benefits. And it's really exciting to see where those things are going to go.
Well, tell me a little bit about more. Tell us about the El Segundo project because I happen to live pretty close to there, and that is a lot of water going into the ocean. Where would that go to get reclaimed?
So that is still being determined. And there's one proposal where the water would be treated at Hyperion, have some level of advanced treatment there, and then be piped up to the top of the LA system. That transporting of that water uphill to the top of the system where it could enter the drinking water system is incredibly expensive. So I believe the anticipated costs for that project right now are somewhere in the range of, I think, 12 to 20 billion dollars. That is an incredible price tag for a project like that. Heal the Bay and our partner organizations have asked the city of Los Angeles to look at different alternatives. Right now, a lot of wastewater is coming to Hyperion from throughout the city of Los Angeles, which, as you know, is incredibly huge and far-reaching. And so, can some of that be distributed to other wastewater treatment plants closer to where those communities are to reduce some of the cost and allow for recycling there? Can we divert some of that water to Tillman, where they have capacity, and could put that water back into that local system? There's also conversations about having the Hyperion supply tie into the Met system, so the Metropolitan Water District system, which is closer, and then having an exchange agreement where the city of Los Angeles would put that water into the Met system and then could pull water from the Met system closer to where we're actually using it. So there are a lot of things that are still yet to be determined, a lot of options and scenarios on the table. But I'm really heartened by the fact that the city of Los Angeles is very open to these alternative ideas. They are sitting down with NGOs and other advocates who are looking at these other alternatives and very and engaging in conversation about what our future could and should look like.
Well, as we talked about the last time, it takes a lot of energy, a lot of electricity to pump this water up a mountain, up a hill, and so there would be a lot of electricity savings if the things that you're talking about could be accomplished as well.
Yeah, I think the more that we can use existing systems, the less that we're tearing up streets and causing traffic jams and all of this thing is going to be better for everyone and certainly going to cost us a lot, both in the construction phase as well as in the operation and maintenance phase. And so it's really, I think, it's really smart of them to take a pause and to look at these different alternatives and make sure that when we're going to invest billions of dollars in something, that we know that it is the most efficient system possible.
Well, Tracy, it's been a pleasure having you on the program again, and an amazing amount of things that you're involved in, and great work that you're doing. And kudos to you and all the organizations that you work with to make our environment safer and healthier here in California and beyond. Best of luck, and also everybody check out Heal the Bay. and all the great work that Tracy's doing. We'll certainly have links to all of social media and all that stuff so people can get involved and volunteer.
Yeah, and if you're in SoCal, come hang out, come to one of our volunteer events, come do community science with us. If you're interested in the marine protected areas, we have an MPA Watch program. There are a lot of ways to get involved. So check out our website and come join us.
Well, we will do that. So thank you, Tracy, and we'll talk soon, hopefully.
Thank you. It's great chatting with you.
Great chatting with you. To learn more about our work at A Climate Change and how you can help us reach our goal of planting 30,000 trees in the Amazon this year, visit aclimatechange.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you like this episode, please share it with a friend. See you next time.